Here is a little self-experiment for you. Write down the following sentence. Next week, my father will win $1 million. Even though I suppose that you didn't write it down because you probably don't have a pencil right now, you might say, well, this is not a problem. I can write this down. In fact, it's quite fun to write something like this down. It makes me feel really good. Okay, let's try the next sentence. Next week, my father or another beloved person, next week, my father will die. And I guess for many of you, this is probably much more difficult. This really feels strange. This really feels wrong, because you shouldn't write something like this down, because thoughts can be quite powerful and they can become reality, can't they? At least this is a metacognitive belief that many people hold. They believe, and we find that very often with many psychological disorders, that some worries they have, like for example, I will lose my job, or I could get really sick, I could get cancer, or a beloved family member could get cancer. Or when it comes to obsessive-compulsive disorder, we often have worries and thoughts like, what if I harm somebody, or what if I contaminated myself with feces, with bacteria or a virus, or what if I have killed somebody with my car? And many people with psychological disorders hold the metacognitive beliefs that these thoughts are very dangerous because they might turn into reality. And this metacognitive belief, of course, causes a lot of distress. It makes people really freak out. It makes them clean their hands all the time because they believe that if they have the thought that they might be contaminated, this also has to mean that they are contaminated, and therefore they have to wash their hands all the time, or they avoid a lot of situations, because if they have the worry that their child could be kidnapped, having this thought really means that this could turn into reality. Fortunately, metacognitive therapy can help to shatter such beliefs, and it's no wonder that metacognitive therapy in quite recent studies was even more effective than the gold standard therapy, the cognitive behavioral therapy. So for example, in a study by Hans Nordahl and colleagues, it could be shown that the recovery rate under metacognitive therapy was 65%, whereas when people were treated with CBT, with cognitive behavioral therapy, the recovery rate for people with generalized anxiety disorder was 38%. So really much lower than the treatment with metacognitive therapy, but still much better than no treatment, because in a waitlist control group, the recovery rate was 0%. But how do you weaken this metacognitive belief that if I think something, it must be true? How do you weaken something like this? How can you shatter this belief? Well, in therapy and or psychological counseling, and I did this many times already, one funny experiment is to say, if you want, for the next 5 minutes, you can try everything. You can have as much mental images as you want of me dying. So it's absolutely okay. You can really try to make me die just by thinking of it. And of course, many people at the beginning, they say, no, I can't do this. This is too heavy, because they believe that their thoughts are really powerful. But after I talked them into it, they try it, and finally they realize, and I'm still standing in front of you and I'm still alive, they realize, well, actually nothing happens. My thoughts are not as powerful or dangerous as I thought. And of course, there are also a lot of other examples. I mean, how often did I dream, for example, of being able to fly? And maybe you did as well. But unfortunately, still today, I'm still standing on the ground, I'm not flying. Or how often did I dream of being able to teleport myself from, for example, like in the movie Jumper, from the pyramids in Gizeh to the Eiffel Tower in Paris, to a wonderful beach in Hawaii. I'm still not able to teleport. Or when I was a kid, I often believed that I was able to influence things, like, for example, a clock. I tried to make it stop, for example, just with the power of my thoughts, like a magician, like Harry Potter, for example. But it's never worked. And another example is when I was younger and I had a lot of social anxiety, I often pictured myself being rejected and being laughed at by other people. And I really had these strong pictures in my mind. And because I had these pictures in my mind, I really believed that this must be true, this must be reality. And therefore I showed a lot of avoidance behavior. But after a while, after a lot of confrontation, I realized, well, all these pictures I had in my mind, they were not reality. It's quite bullshit. People are quite friendly when you go to them and you do just a little bit small talk. And this is also something that could be shown in a new study published in 2020, in which participants were asked to write down their worries for some time and afterwards to answer whether these worries turned into reality or not. And it turned out that on average 91.4% of all the worries did never turn into reality. In fact, for many participants, 100% of the worries they had never turned into reality. And of those worries that turned into reality, 30% actually turned out to be much less threatening and much more distressing than they had believed. So are thoughts really that powerful? Is it really that dangerous to write down next week my father will die? Of course not. Just because you write down that maybe next week my father or you will win in the lottery, it doesn't happen. So a much better way to handle those kinds of worries, instead of giving them too much meaning and saying, well, those one day they could turn into reality, a much better way in metacognitive therapy is the so-called detached mindfulness, which means that you are mindful that you have a trigger thought, like, for example, maybe I could lose my job, or what if I fail the exam? Thoughts we all have from day to day, but the only difference is how much we ruminate about them, how much it's quite similar to getting bitten by a mosquito, for example. If you don't act on it, if you leave it alone, after a while it will no longer hurt. But if you begin to scratch, it can happen that after a while it even inflames and it hurts even more. So the best way indeed is to not act on it. It's as I said, the detached mindfulness. You realize that there is a thought like this. So this is the mindfulness part. But instead of interacting with this thought, instead of buying into this reality, you detach yourself and you, for example, you concentrate on the task on hand, or you meet with a friend, or you just focus your attention on something else. For example, on what you are hearing in the environment, for example, the singing birds or the sounds of the wind. Or you could also focus on what kinds of colors you see in your environment. Just focus on all objects that, for example, are green, which here would be very easy, but you could also focus on all those things that are blue, and you will immediately get out of your mind. And this is something we find with many psychological disorders, that people are completely caught in their own mind. And focusing on the outside world and getting out of your own head can be a really game changer and can be a great relief. That's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Of course, if you want, you can also take a look at the books or take a look at the website, and maybe we will see you next time.